Thank you so much, Daniel. Awesome. So excited to meet you guys. So yeah, we have an amazing panel, and we're going to be discussing lessons learned in building enterprise AI agents from people who've actually built them and deployed them, and given actual value to enterprises. So yeah, I'll just let you guys introduce yourselves first and your companies and what you guys do.
Okay, this is on. Cool. Hi, my name is Sandi Besen. I'm an applied AI research engineer and an ecosystem lead at IBM Research, and I work in the product incubation team. And so we're working primarily on two products right now, one called BAI. It's an open source framework, platform, and ACP, or agent-agent protocol. And that is what I'm currently doing.
My name is Chileshe. I'm the CEO for The Zig. We are an AI and data engineering consulting company, and we help companies just on their AI journey. And my background is I'm a former recovering engineer myself, and I've been speaking to a lot of those people here, so it's a little bit intimidating, but hopefully we can add some value for you guys.
Hi, everybody. I'm Boaz Ashkenazy. I'm the CEO of Augmented AI Labs. And we build solutions, AI solutions for companies that have high-stakes environments, so where accuracy really matters. Most of it is around legal and legal adjacent and some small government-related projects. And yeah, it's really, really excited to be here.
Awesome, thank you so much. So yeah, the format of this will be like I'll just ask some of the questions I'm really curious about, and then hopefully we'll have some time in the end to also take audience questions. So yeah, please keep them ready for towards the end. So yeah, I wanted to start out by asking why is it hard to build AI agents at enterprise scale? What is something that people don't know are challenges that come up? Yeah, Sandi, do you want to start?
Okay, we'll go this way. But then the next time we have to go that way.
I have a whole thing planned. Then we start in the middle and we do a
Okay,
whole
great. There are a lot of challenges, and it really depends, and this is such a consulting answer, but it depends on what use case, right? It's like sometimes the challenge is the level of risk that the client actually wants to take when things get put into prod and they see this really cool, fancy demo, and they want to see that really cool, fancy demo, right? Like, because you want to impress them and they want to be impressed. But then when it actually comes, especially if the use case is client-facing or customer-facing and not just internal, that level of, they all of a sudden want to clear the air of the fancy magic, right? And they want to reduce the level of risk. And so what you show in that prototype or demo or RFI or RFP is often different than what you end up implementing in prod. And I think that will end up changing as we get better guardrails and things that we'll probably talk about later. But I think that is the first thing that I've noticed and was the biggest shock to me when I actually started put things in prod, is that they want to see this in the beginning, but when it actually comes to fruition, that's not what they want yet.
I think one of the things, I'll say two things. I think the first one is ROI conversations, right? They want almost near instant ROI from AI. And that stems from the second point, which is there's an overpromise just out there from a lot of AI influencers, I'll say, who are promising people the world. And so when they see these demos and then you have a conversation with them about what's possible, you need to kind of bring things back down to reality. And so that can be a little bit harder to do. It's not a technical challenge. It's more of just like a conversation challenge to say, okay, here's what's actually possible, especially with the limitations of your specific use case and your environment and your data and how much you're willing to pay. And so all those things kind of factor in a big way into kind of what's actually possible for that implementation. So yeah, those two things, I think, cost from one perspective, or rather ROI, returning that investment to the business, and then being able to ground that in an actual feasible case study.
And for us, especially deploying to production, the biggest surprise was cost. And it was one thing to be at a smaller scale and testing things out, and it was working and it was secure. But when we started increasing scale, that's when I think there were a lot of surprises. And we can talk about this more as we get into that part of the conversation, but a lot of times we would throw the kitchen sink at certain parts and not be very, very specific about the problems that we were solving. And then all of a sudden, the bill was coming, and we were, folks were surprised. And so I think that's the part that really needs to be managed, and it's tricky, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. I think, like, how can you even tell when an AI agent is doing well? Like, how do you have a shared understanding with your customers about whether an AI agent is performing well or well enough to put into production? Like, how do you kind of go about approaching that? Yeah, you can start, Boaz.
I mean, I would say that we're pretty conservative about the way that we approach it, given the kind of customers that we're dealing with, a lot of financial services, law firms. And so we almost always have elements of a human in the loop during the process. I mean, there are some goals being set and some things being done and function calling happening, but there's dashboards that are really, really specific about where things are being caught and uncertainties that are happening within the process, and then allowing for people to get involved and make decisions about it. So for us, I can't think of a project where we don't have some element of a human plugging in to make a decision.
I think I'm going to answer all my questions in two parts. So I think the first one is like, grounding some truth in some level of KPI. For my nerds in the room, which is basically everybody, let's be real, who knows what like the Pareto frontier is? Okay, so do you want to define it? No. Okay. So basically, the Pareto frontier is just like the trade-off of how do you trade off? What's the trade-off between the most efficient set of parameters that you care about, right? So, for example, I have 5 or 6 different competing KPIs that I care about, and then the Pareto frontier will tell me at what point does that trade-off not make any sense for one of those to be impacted. So we help educate our customers on the Pareto frontier and say, look, there's going to be trade-offs, right? Like you might want better accuracy, and that might come at a higher cost. You might want more, you might want it to be cheaper, but that comes at a lower speed, right? So there's all these different things that you have to compete for. And then unless you have unlimited resources and unlimited time, you're not going to get all of them. So we educate our customers on that Pareto frontier and say, okay, here's a set of solutions that we can build for you. And some of them don't even hit the frontier, so let's not even consider them. But for the ones that they do, which trade-offs do you care about more? And so it helps ground it in some sort of like quantitative metric that you can measure. And then it becomes a much, much easier conversation because now it's binary. Did it hit the frontier or did it not? And so you're having less of a debate about those things. It's more just like, tell us your business rules, tell us your business conditions. We'll plug those onto that. We'll plug those in as conditions for the Pareto calculation. And then that kind of helps determine whether it was a success or not. I realized I didn't give you a second part because I spoke too long, so we'll move on.
I'm not going to lie, I already forgot the original question, but I'll just answer something. So I think, along with that, I'm going to answer in 3 parts, but 3 small parts. A lot of times, clients want us to, it comes down to reducing OpEx. Like that hasn't changed. It's just the method that we go about it that has changed. And so if we'd like to reduce OpEx, that's what we're evaluating for mostly. We're also definitely taking into consideration guardrails, making sure that the agent or that the system is not speaking about things that would bring more liability to the company, which is like a whole nother topic of how do you even really do that and how good are we at doing that yet. But it comes down to OpEx, and we do that through evaluation. There's really only 2 parts.
Yeah, thank you so much. Chris, I had a follow-up to what you said. I'm curious, like, as you said, there are multiple, like 5 to 6 KPIs that, you kind of have to track and then see which ones they care about and meet the Pareto frontier there. Are there any KPIs that are like, you have to track in very unique ways or are very hard to kind of track? Because things like user engagement or I don't know, things like that, and tying that back into the system.
Yeah, so I think what we try to do is build some degree of telemetry for feedback as you're deploying these agents. So of course you're tracking, like, for example, if you're doing a chat bot that's LLM powered, right? You're tracking all of the conversations that go into it, and then the responses and how, and then you know, with the human in the loop example, you have to have someone come in and assess whether that answer was good or not. And so that becomes another metric that you sort of use to evaluate whether your LLM is actually, is actually improving in the way that it responds to questions, right? So you have your like baseline measurements, which are like, you can measure your F1 score, which is like recall and precision. You can measure accuracy. You can measure all those things. But then case by case, the business should really be telling you what else they care about. Like everybody's going to care about the quality of the response, especially if you're doing sort of like a knowledge base agent of some sort. So, the quality of the response is a really qualitative measure, but then you try to convert that into something quantitative. It ends up being a little bit wishy-washy. It's not like a perfect science always, but you do your best to make it quantitative.
Yeah, thank you. Makes a lot of sense. Boaz, you mentioned human in the loop. I'm curious, like, I think we see AI applications at a lot of different levels of abstractions right now. For example, Cursor is very much human in the loop, where I code with it in an IDE, whereas something like a Codex or a Claude Code is like one level above in that abstraction, where you kind of just let it give you PRs directly in your GitHub. And I don't know, taking that even further to like a Devin, which is just another like agent human software engineer. I'm curious, like, how do you determine what parts of a new system you're building should be human in the loop versus not?
Yeah, I guess I'll give an example. We're working for this company called Guidant Financial. And Guidant is a really niche fintech company that has a lot of compliance related to its product. And oftentimes they were either making their customer fill out a form or their employees fill out a form to get all this unstructured data into a structured environment. And instead, we deployed some agents to read all these documents. And these documents are really all over the place. These payroll documents can be really messy. And sometimes if you just feed it to a large language model, it can get confused. And so what we did was we established a bunch of criteria, document by document, and then we allowed it to flag things that it was confused about and present that to the user in a pretty conventional dashboard. And so once we did that, that was a way for us to kind of inject human in the loop in the process and learn from that as well and get better. And we were tasked with trying to get the accuracy from what started at around 70% to the high 90s. And there was still there was a margin there that it was still getting confused about, but it was much, much better after implementing that layer.
Can I add on to Boaz's story?
Yes,
So I heard a funny story. I was on a panel a couple weeks ago with Quinyin, and she is the founder of AG2, formerly known as AutoGen. And she told what I thought was a hilarious story around that she had built a system for her emails. And she didn't want to have to respond to all these incoming emails all the time, right? So she built her own kind of fielding and then response agent, but she hadn't really inserted human in the loop yet. So when she checked back to her email system, and this was a while ago, I think she learned from this lesson, she realized that the agent was going back and forth with her attorney. And it was costing her, and it didn't make any big decisions, but it was costing her like $700 in the attorney's time, right? So I think what I learned from that and took away from that is I will always put human in the loop as long as the decision will cost more than the inference.
I have one more test that I like. We use internally, and it's a question you ask, sort of like, what if you had an intern working for you doing the same thing? How much of this would you trust them to do by themselves? And at that point, that's where you decide to put a human in the loop. So, there's a degree of this trust factor where it's like, okay, I think LLMs are far smart. I think they can do all these things, but to what degree should I be trusting them? And so if you just apply that sort of like simple logic question, and we ask our customers as well, this is like, if an intern was managing this process and, you left them to their own devices, at what point would you want them to tell you when something's up? And then those are the conditions you put in to kind of like break out of your automation and go to escalate.
And I really like that metaphor too. This came up recently with law firms, and there was some older partners in the firm that were getting, they were concerned that an agent would go off and do a bunch of things, and then, maybe it would go in front of a judge, and people were getting their hands slapped, and he was really concerned about that. But I said, when do you ever show a judge something that a human intern does without ever looking at it? And the answer was never. Like, he would never let a junior just write up a brief for him and give it to, and it's the same thing. It's just happening later. And for him, he was going to review that stuff anyway, but there was an agentic process that was getting it to the point where, he could review it faster and the work was getting done faster. So I really like that metaphor.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Basically, never give AI access to prod is what I'm hearing. Nice. Very cool. I was curious, could you help us break down this whole space of agent communication protocols? I feel like there's a lot going around with MCP, and then Google's released with A2A and stuff. I feel, as somebody who's building agents for enterprises, how do they kind of use these securely in a way that agents can communicate with the world and with other agents going forward?
Yeah, we're kind of at that next evolution now, and it's something that is very much in development still. So the team that I'm working on, as I mentioned, is working on an agent-to-agent communication protocol called ACP. It's something to note. It seems like a lot of people in this audience are pretty up to speed on what MCP is. I've talked to a lot of people, and that's awesome. It means we're in the right place too. But the main difference for those that still don't know between A2A or ACP and MCP is MCP deals mostly with model context. So it provides tools, resources, or prompts to the model specifically, or to an LLM specifically, really. Whereas A2A or ACP work more on this horizontal level, where they enable an agent or a microservice or subprocess to communicate with another, no matter what framework or technology it's built in, right? So we're kind of coming to this next evolution where we've built things in silos already. We have this agent running in this environment and this agent running in this environment, but we want to enable them to collaborate with each other. And so that's where we're seeing this next protocol come in, is we need some standardization in this field. And it's so unclear right now who the winner of that is going to be. And there's lots of stuff happening as well behind the scenes of are certain players going to work together, and are we going to get behind each other? But I think the most important thing in that, according to our team's perspective and my personal perspective as well, is that we focus on two things. One is simplicity, because we don't need to overcomplicate this. It's already complicated. And two is open governance. And we've chosen to go open governance direction because we think that we want the community to have an influence on where these are taken, right? You guys are the ones building with this, not just one company like Google, IBM, Microsoft. It doesn't just matter for us. The whole community should have decision-making power.
Can you repeat that question for me? I just want to make sure I'm answering the right thing.
I just wanted to say that because there are newer and newer agent communication protocols coming out every day, some focused on agent to tools communication and some focused on agent to agent. How could you kind of build your systems in ways that they're general enough to adapt to whatever comes out?
I think if you take away the idea that this is an AI powered and whatever, and you just strip away the AI part of it, in traditional software engineering, there's new tools coming out all the time, and you kind of embrace it. The way we used to do it before is how many GitHub stars does it have, right? So who's using it the most, right? And how much community support does it have? And so I think you do away with sort of the buzzwords, and you go back to just your basic software engineering principles, and you say, okay, I think this has longevity because of XYZ reasons, and you can kind of internally justify that. And then how much community support does it have? How many other people are contributing to it? And I think that's kind of the best way. I don't know that there's really an easy answer to that question that is gonna is going to be special for AI or special for MCP in particular. There's been lots of protocols that have come and gone for throughout the software engineering lifecycle. There's GraphQL, and you know, like there was an embrace of doing things through GraphQL, and then all of a sudden people are like, hey, this is just REST with different JSON. I don't like this anymore, you know? And so it changes all the time. I don't think you need to worry about it too much. I think you just kind of like go check your GitHub stars and figure out which one which one has the most community support and go with that for a little bit, and then it will change, and then you'll be screwed and you have to fix it, you know.
And I guess my answer is a little bit obvious, but you know, when we started this company, like in February of 2023, the world was a lot different, and you know, these models were not as capable as they are now, and so we tried to be as modular as possible when we build the systems so that we can swap things out really easily. And it's just changing so fast. To have that kind of flexibility is really important. And then the second thing is that, you know, we've been kind of conservative about the ways that we've been thinking about these protocols. We use a lot of conventional tooling and like a lot of function calling, even though we have a bunch of multiple models happening in these workflows. And so, you know, like if you have a lot of data coming in and it's sensitive data, sometimes we will feed the model only the things that it needs. And so we're trying to be really careful and use conventional, you know, software at the beginning of the process and then at the end too.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask, switching gears a little bit, specifically on the enterprise side, there are often many constraints around the data and how much data can flow, and how much you can use to kind of train these models and not use or use for evaluations. I'm curious, like how do you kind of work with enterprises on you know, these data policies that they have? And yeah, Chris, you can maybe start.
Yeah, I think it's really funny because over the last 10, 15 years, we've been telling everybody to like move to the cloud. And then now I think like AI is actually having the opposite effect of like move on premises, right? Because you don't want to share your data to your secret sauce and stuff. And so you see a lot of companies realizing that. I think Microsoft in particular with their AI Studio or Copilot Studio, their big push is your data is yours, your data is yours, your data is yours. Because there's a realization that people will not want to give them their data. So they really, really need to hammer the story that your data is yours. So I think, kind of going back to your question, you end up having conversations about where your data is stored, and then really just convincing the customer that it's still safe in the cloud. Like none of the fundamentals around data security have changed, right? You feeding it into a model, even a proprietary one, I think that's where you have to be careful. Like if you have to access your model through a public API, then realize that you may have signed a contract to give that data up. If you're self-hosting in an enterprise setting like on AWS, like on Microsoft, then you're less likely to be giving your data away. So just read your terms and conditions really, really carefully, or just self-host. And so that goes back to now going and building on-premises data centers and workloads and things like that. And you even see NVIDIA investing in giving people supercomputer hardware so that you have like a bunch of GPUs that you can self-host models for your own entities. So I think it's a funny shift that we just convinced everybody to go to the cloud, and then we're convincing everybody to come off the cloud and like self-host stuff.
Yeah, would you like to add on to that, Boaz?
I will just say that we're pretty strict about what we let our models do and not do. And so even though they might have access to the entire SQL database or whatever it is that we're doing, we restrict the inputs and the outputs really heavily, and so that keeps things in check. The other thing is, especially if there's a lot of social security numbers or other kind of sensitive data, we also try to kind of limit the pipe and limit the model in those cases.
Yeah. Sandi, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll just reiterate that you would treat it like a human, right? You use least access principles. You use like the same things you would for a human admin would for engineers, right? You encrypt things when you need to. You anonymize things, like you were saying. Like I think if we treat it that way, then there is less that could go wrong. Doesn't mean it won't go wrong or won't hallucinate things, right? But there's less that could go wrong. And then you build in the proper guardrails. You were mentioning that you put guardrails on first and then on the way out, right? I think that's a really smart way to do it. A lot of people forget that you need guardrails on the way in, not just the way out. And what those guardrails are, there's lots of solutions out there. Some of them are AI solutions, and some of them are just, standard programmatic solutions. And I think we have this mindset now that everything needs to be AI is actually the best way to do it. But in my previous role, we were working on a classifier that was just an ML algorithm, and it beat GPT-4o so many times in terms of prompt injection classifications. So there's lots of good solutions out there, and LLMs are not always the best solution for that type of thing.
And I'll build.
Okay. So I think there's also an interesting topic around synthetic data too. I think I don't know if I'm ready to make a hot take on it, but I think there's a
hot take.
There's an opportunity, I think, with synthetic data where if you have a good enough model of your real data, and then you use an LLM to actually generate more synthetic data on the basis of your real data, then you can perhaps have increase your training. And we're running out of, like, even OpenAI is running out of data to train on. So they're really exploring the space of, like, what does synthetic data look like, and can LLMs generate good enough synthetic data? And my argument in the enterprise setting is, like, actually, I think this is my hot take. I don't think you need as much real data. I think you can use primarily synthetic data, because what you're looking for is edge cases of your real data, right? Whereas OpenAI is trying to model the whole world, you're just trying to model your use case. And so if you don't have data that represents a known edge case, you can just create it. And then you can use your model to train on that, and then you can kind of score whether it's overfitting, underfitting, and doing all this other stuff. So I think in an enterprise setting, there's actually more use cases for synthetic data than sort of like these foundational models. And it's a good place to apply some of that innovation around synthetic data.
Yeah.
And I'll just add one point. I'll build on what Sandi said. There are a bunch of cases where we are limiting the model's ability to use trained data just outright. And we're saying, and conceptually the way that I think about it is, use the model for what it's good at, language, but don't let it use trained data for any answers. And not always, but in a lot of cases, by limiting the model in that way, we get much better results. And that's been helpful to think about it in that way.
Got it. Thank you so much. And we encourage hot takes here, so please go ahead. Since we only have a few minutes left, I'll take some questions from the audience. Would anybody like to ask something? And I can bring the mic over to you.
Hi, I'm Mary. I work with industry ISVs at AWS. I feel like there's a lot of speculation that agents will wildly disrupt, even kill the SaaS business model. But enterprise buyers, for all the obvious reasons you've discussed, are proceeding kind of with caution. So I guess I'm curious for your take on how the adoption curve will actually play out.
Yeah.
Can I start?
Yeah, sure.
I think about this a lot, and I also get asked about SaaS a lot. And in terms of I don't think SaaS is going to die. I think SaaS will change, and the solutions will change. But the reality is, people need things as services, because not everyone can build and host everything themselves. So, maybe certain companies can create their own internal platforms, or they're able to use just open source stuff that they can host. But the majority of especially smaller and mid-sized businesses that don't have the talent are still going to need to rely on hosted solutions that provide a service to them. So will those solutions change? Yeah, I think they're going to look different, as the back end and the front end will look different. But I don't think SaaS is going to die.
I would agree with that. We still host a lot of the solutions that we provide and maintain those solutions. I just think the pricing of it is changing drastically, because especially if people start using it a lot, then all of a sudden you have to kind of rethink the way it's the per user model is just really hard to manage. And so we're still trying to figure that out, and it depends on the situation, and it depends how public the chat is, for example, or how internal it is. And we're really, if anybody has any good ideas about business model around that, I would love to hear, but it's really challenging.
Yeah, I think sometimes, when we're in conferences like this, this becomes a bubble where we think AI is moving so much faster than it is in the real world, and then when you talk to enterprise clients, you're like, oh shit, it's super slow, and so like I don't think. Yeah, I don't think things are dying as fast as people think they are. And to both your points, right? Like it's just the the adoption is super slow in the real world. There's highly regulated industries where the risk is too high to adopt too quickly, and that could mean being slapped on the wrist by the SEC or HIPAA or whatever, right? Like there's just a ton of risk that doesn't allow for adoption, especially risk that represents a financial consequence. So I think the SaaS model where you have like some safely ingrained software that works and works well and people don't want to move away from it is one part. And then I think humans just like, again, we're in a bubble where we're probably trying this stuff out daily, and we're always trying out the new latest stuff, but some people just don't want to. Like there's people who don't want to use ChatGPT, and they think like it's run by demons in the background or whatever. So it's just, yeah, I think it's going to be a lot slower adoption.
I will share a funny story. So we were working with this law firm in Omaha recently, and there was a bunch of young folks in the firm that were really loving using ChatGPT for a lot of their tasks. But they were being asked to manage their billable hours, for the week, and they had certain quotas for their billable hours. And so even though it was getting done faster using these tools, they were hesitant to do that because they wanted to meet their quotas. And so I think that the change management in some of these organizations is real, and it depends on the incentives that you provide people. And so I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, that I'm gonna do that at work. I'm just gonna. Awesome. I think we have time for one last question. I'm getting eyes from Daniel, but I'll still ask it. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Surya Jagotia, building Uniblocks. The question for you all is, I think the rate at which the whole AI space is changing around is too fast, I believe, even for startups like us. What have you seen in the last year that you were like, okay, if this was happening, we probably would not have built things this way? The common use cases about agent frameworks and stuff. And what would you say build or don't build, because in a year from now, this is what you anticipate? Like context windows and stuff. Like, last year it was all about reinforcement learning. Context windows have now changed. You can throw in a lot more tokens are available. So things like that. Like, what did you learn? What would you say? This is what you need to plan.
Chris, do you want to go ahead?
No, I don't. Wow. I don't know. It requires a little bit of a crystal ball, and I don't have one. I think this is going to be like the biggest non-answer answer ever. So I think it's really hard to try and anticipate like what's going to change. Like I'm constantly surprised by what tools are out there and what tools are not. The longer context windows, it's funny that you mentioned that, because to one degree, like it's helpful, but to another degree, it makes things more expensive. So it's like in an enterprise setting, it can become sometimes undesirable because it balloons your costs and your inference, your token cost, right? So to some degree, it's like, yeah, it's useful, but it's not always meaningfully useful. So I wish I had a good answer for that. I think that's a good gotcha question. You got me. I don't know how to answer that one.
Yeah, Sandi, do you want to? I think you were going to say something.
So is Boaz. You want to go first?
Yeah.
I think things are shifting left, and we're hearing this from like quite a few people. And as the reasoning ability of the model gets stronger and stronger, we're seeing less need for tooling to be built out. And so if I had to, and this is not a non-answer, but not a, it's not like focus on this and don't focus on this necessarily, but I think one, use something that doesn't require a lot of vendor lock-in, right? So that way you don't have as much technical debt. And two, I would focus more in anticipation of the system self-improving as you switch out the model. So as things get so much better, right? Like, and inference costs come down, and it becomes easier for you to improve your system without needing to build all this extra tooling. Like React was like something that was so last year now, which is crazy because like that was a huge deal last year when everyone was learning about it for the first time. But we need that less and less now as these reasoning models come out and things start shifting left to the model provider side. So that would just be my advice, is build with the anticipation that things will get better and that you don't need necessarily, that all of the like intermediate fixes might be temporary.
And my answer is similar. It has to do with timing and ROI. So a lot of times we're being asked to take something from mid 70s in accuracy to the high 90s in accuracy. But the question really is, can we wait for 6 months? Or do we have to do that now? Because we are actually building a layer on top of these large language models to make it easier for them to process things, whether it's numbers or whatever it happens to be. But then all of a sudden, OpenAI comes out with something and we plug it in and it's like, whoa, that's working now, much better, you know? And so all that time that we spent is kind of lost. But sometimes people need it fast, and that's the decision, you know, the choice that you have to make. But we always ask people too, you know, can you wait? And you know, sometimes you can.
Yeah, I shouldn't have never gone first. Those are good answers. I second everything they said.
Yeah, that was my bad, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. We'll talk
Awesome.
later.
Thank you so much. I think this was like we all learned so much, and yeah, a big round of applause for our panel.